Welcome to our Mother Goose reading. This is a special performance of stories from Mother Goose by the Ether Tale Theater Players in partnership with WS Radio and DSI Marketing Solutions. We are doing this in celebration of the upcoming Mother Goose Parade, Sunday, November 18th, 2018, at 1 p.m. in downtown El Cajon. The parade is sponsored by Waste Management, City of El Cajon, DP Homes, Downtown El Cajon Business Partners, and Mercedes-Benz of El Cajon. To march in the parade or to be a volunteer, go to www.mothergooseparade.org. And now, here's our loquacious leader, Scott Paulson.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, or maybe it's morning for some of you. This is a special broadcast to celebrate the Mother Goose Parade.
Hooray!
And Melanie Peters is here with me.
Hello.
And we're going to be reading some of the original Mother Goose rhymes that really ring in our hearts so much. But also, we're going to read the wonderful prose versions of the stories that Frank Baum, yes, Mr. Wizard of Oz, that Frank Baum wrote based on the Mother Goose rhymes. So I'm really looking forward to that. In fact, I'm looking forward to hearing from Melanie right now. Which Mother Goose story do you have before you?
So I have Sing a Song of Sixpence, which is my favorite of the nursery rhymes. I grew up on Mother Goose. I had a beautiful illustrated Mother Goose book as a child. But every night before I went to bed, my mom had a handful of songs that she would sing to me. And one of them was Sing a Song of Sixpence. So
I hope she's listening tonight.
I hope I will tell her to listen.
Very good.
It's also a great Agatha Christie book.
I'll look into that.
Yeah. Okay. This is the Baum prose version of Sing a Song of Sixpence. Sing a song of sixpence, a handful of rye, 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. Wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king? If you have never heard the legend of Gilligren and the king's pie, you will scarcely understand the above verse. So I will tell you the whole story, and then you will be able to better appreciate the rhyme. Gilligren was an orphan and lived with an uncle and aunt who were very unkind to him. They cuffed him and scolded him upon the slightest provocation and made his life very miserable indeed. Gilligren never rebelled against this treatment, but bore their cruelty silently and with patience, although often he longed to leave them and seek a home amongst kinder people. It so happened that when Gilligren was 12 years old, the king died, and his son was to be proclaimed king in his place and crowned with great ceremony. People were flocking to London from all parts of the country to witness the festivities, and the boy longed to go with them. One evening he said to his uncle, "If I had sixpence, I could make my fortune." "Pooh! Nonsense!" exclaimed his uncle. "A sixpence is a small thing. How then could you make a fortune from it?" "That I cannot tell you," replied Gilligren, "but if you will give me the sixpence, I will go to London and not return until I am a rich man." "The boy is a fool," said his uncle with anger, but the aunt spoke up quickly. "Give him the money and let him go," she said, "and then we shall be well rid of him and no longer be obliged to feed and clothe him at our expense." "Well," said her husband after a moment's thought, "here is the money, but remember, this is all I shall ever give you, and when it is gone, you must not come to me for more." "Never fear," replied Gilligren joyfully as he put the sixpence in his pocket. "I shall not trouble you again." The next morning he cut a short stick to assist him in walking, and after bidding good-bye to his uncle and aunt, he started upon his journey to London. "The money will not last him 2 days," said the man as he watched Gilligren go down the turnpike road, "and when it is gone he will starve to death." "Or he may fall in with people who will treat him worse than we did," rejoined the woman, "and then he'll wish he had never left us." But Gilligren, nothing dismayed by thoughts of the future, trudged bravely along the London road. The world was before him, and the bright sunshine glorified the dusty road and lightened the tips of the dark green hedges that bordered his path. At the end of his pilgrimage was the great city, and he never doubted he would find therein proper work and proper pay, and much better treatment than he was accustomed to receive. So On he went, whistling merrily to while away the time, watching the sparrows skim over the fields and enjoying to the full the usual sights that met his eyes. At noon he overtook a carter, who divided with the boy his luncheon of bread and cheese, and for supper a farmer's wife gave him a bowl of milk. When it grew dark, he crawled under a hedge and slept soundly until dawn. The next day he kept steadily upon his way, and toward evening met a farmer with a wagon loaded with sacks of grain. "Where are you going, my lad?" asked the man. "To London," replied Gilligren, "to see the king crowned." "Have you any money?" inquired the farmer. "Oh, yes," answered Gilligren. "I have a sixpence." "If you will give me the sixpence," said the man, "I will give you a sack of rye for it." "What could I do with a sack of rye?" asked Gilligren, wondering. "Take it to the mill and get it ground into flour. With the flour you could have bread baked, and that you can sell." "That is a good idea," replied Gilligren. "So here is my sixpence, and now give me the sack of rye." The farmer put the sixpence carefully into his pocket, and then reached under the seat of the wagon and drew out a sack, which he cast on the ground at the boy's feet. "There is your sack of rye," he said with a laugh. "But the sack is empty," remonstrated Gilligren. "Oh, no, there is some rye in it." "But only a handful," said Gilligren, when he had opened the mouth of the sack and gazed within it. "It is a sack of rye, nevertheless," replied the wicked farmer, "and I did not say how much rye there would be in the sack I would give you. Let this be a lesson to you never again to buy grain without looking into the sack." And with that he whipped up his horses and left Gilligren standing in the road with the sack at his feet and nearly ready to cry at his loss. "My sixpence is gone," he said to himself, "and I have received nothing in exchange but a handful of rye. How can I make my fortune with that?" He did not despair, however, but picked up the sack and continued his way along the dusty road. Soon it became too dark to travel farther, and Gilligren stepped aside into a meadow where, lying down upon the sweet grass, he rolled the sack into a pillow for his head and prepared to sleep. The rye that was within the sack, however, hurt his head, and he sat up and opened the sack. "Why should I keep a handful of rye?" he thought. "It will be of no value to me at all." So he threw out the rye upon the ground, and rolling up the sack again for a pillow, was soon sound asleep. When he awoke, the sun was shining brightly over his head, and the twitter and chirping of many birds fell upon his ears. Gilligren opened his eyes and saw a large flock of blackbirds feeding upon the rye he had scattered upon the ground. So intent were they upon their feast, they never noticed Gilligren at all. He carefully unfolded the sack, and spreading wide its opening, threw it quickly over the flock of blackbirds. Some escaped and flew away, but a great many were caught, and Gilligren put his eye to the sack and found he had captured 24. He tied the mouth of the sack with a piece of twine that was in his pocket, and then threw the sack over his shoulder and began again his journey to London. "I have made a good exchange after all," he thought, "for surely 24 blackbirds are worth more than a handful of rye, and perhaps even more than a sixpence, if I can find anyone who wishes to buy them." He now walked rapidly forward, and about noon entered the great city of London. Gilligren wandered about the streets until he came to the king's palace, where there was a great concourse of people and many guards to keep intruders from the gates. Seeing he could not enter from the front, the boy walked around to the rear of the palace and found himself near the royal kitchen, where the cooks and other servants were rushing around to hasten the preparation of the king's dinner. Gilligren sat down upon a stone where he could watch them, and laying the sack at his feet, was soon deeply interested in this strange sight. Presently a servant in the king's livery saw him and came to his side. "What are you doing here?" he asked roughly. "I am waiting to see the king," replied Gilligren. "The king? The king never comes here," said the servant, "and neither do we allow idlers about the royal kitchen. So depart at once, or I shall be forced to call a guard to arrest you." Gilligren rose obediently and slung his sack over his shoulder. As he did so, the birds that were within began to flutter. "What have you in the sack?" asked the servant. "Blackbirds," replied Gilligren. "Blackbirds?" echoed the servant in surprise. "Well, that is very fortunate indeed. Come with me at once." He seized the boy by the arm and drew him hastily along until they entered the great kitchen of the palace. "Here, Mr. Baker," called the man excitedly, "I have found your blackbirds." A big, fat man, who was standing in the middle of the kitchen with folded arms and a look of despair upon his round, greasy face, at once came toward them and asked eagerly, "The blackbirds, are you sure you can get them?" "They are here already. The boy has a bag full of them." "Give them to me," said the cook, who wore a square cap that was shaped like a box upon his head. "What do you want with them?" asked Gilligren. "I want them for a pie for the king's dinner," answered Mr. Baker. "His Majesty ordered the dish, and I have hunted all over London for the blackbirds, but could not find them. Now that you have brought them, however, you have saved me my position as cook, and perhaps my head as well." "But it would be cruel to put the beautiful birds in a pie," remonstrated Gilligren, "and I shall not give them to you for such a purpose." "Nonsense," replied the cook. "The king has ordered it. He is very fond of the dish." "Still, you cannot have them," declared the boy stoutly. "The birds are mine, and I will not have them killed." "But what can I do?" asked the cook in perplexity. "The king has ordered a blackbird pie, and your birds are the only blackbirds in London." Gilligren thought deeply for a moment, and conceived what he thought to be a very good idea. If the sixpence was to make his fortune, then this was his great opportunity. "You can have the blackbirds on 2 conditions," he said. "What are they?" asked the cook. "One is that you will not kill the birds. The other condition is that you secure me a position in the king's household." "How can I put live birds in a pie?" inquired the cook. "Very easily, if you make the pie big enough to hold them. You can serve the pie after the king has satisfied his hunger with other dishes, and it will amuse the company to find live birds in the pie when they expected cooked ones." "It is a risky experiment," exclaimed the cook, "for I do not know the new king's temper. But the idea may please his Majesty, and since you will not allow me to kill the birds, it is the best thing I can do. As for your other condition, you seem to be a very bright boy, and so I will have the butler take you as his page, and you shall stand back of the king's chair and keep the flies away while he eats." The butler being called, and his consent secured, the cook fell to making the crust for his novel pie, while Gilligren was taken to the servants' hall and dressed in a gorgeous suit of the king's livery. When the dinner was served, the king kept looking for the blackbird pie, but he said nothing, and at last the pie was placed before him, its crust looking light and brown, and sprigs of myrtle being stuck in the 4 corners to make it look more inviting. Although the king had already eaten heartily, he smacked his lips when he saw this tempting dish, and picking up the carving fork, he pushed it quickly into the pie. At once the crust fell in, and all the 24 blackbirds put up their heads and began to look about them. And coming from the blackness of the pie into the brilliantly lighted room, they thought they were in the sunshine, and began to sing merrily, while some of the boldest hopped out upon the table or began flying around the room. At first the good king was greatly surprised, but soon, appreciating the jest, he lay back in his chair and laughed long and merrily. And his courtiers and the fine ladies present heartily joined in the laughter, for they were also greatly amused. Then the king called for the cook, and when Mr. Baker appeared, uncertain of his reception, and filled with many misgivings, his Majesty cried, "Sirrah, how came you to think of putting live birds in the pie?" The cook, fearing that the king was angry, answered, "May it please you, your Majesty, it was not my thought, but the idea of the boy who stands behind your chair." The king turned his head, and seeing Gilligren, who looked very well in his new livery, said, "You are a clever youth, and deserve a better position than that of a butler's lad. Hereafter you shall be one of my own pages, and if you serve me faithfully, I will advance your fortunes with your deserts." And Gilligren did serve the king faithfully, and as he grew older acquired much honor and great wealth. "After all," he used to say, "that 6 pence made my fortune, and it all came about through such a small thing as a handful of rye."
Thank you, Miss Melanie. That's particularly touching, too, because I know how much these stories mean to you. Not necessarily the Baum ones, but the original rhymes or songs or poems.
Yes, my mom used to sing that to me. I know it as a
Yes.
song.
Yeah, and there isn't really any surviving music per se, but as part of our collective consciousness, there are some tunes that are so heavily associated with many of these that still resonate with us. We have a special guest with us in the studio today, Miss Melanie. It's Wade Taylor, ladies and gentlemen. The czar of WSRadio.com is here, and Wade wanted to read a Mother Goose rhyme for us, and we'd love to hear it. Wade, which one do you have before you?
Well, we've got Old King Cole, and it's always fun to participate and happy to be joining you. And yeah, the great things about these poems is they are naturally musical, and they just kind of lend themselves to their own tune. And so, this one I always remember. Old King Cole was a merry old soul, and a merry old soul was he. He called for his pipe, and he called for his bowl, and he called for his fiddlers 3. Every fiddler he had a fiddle, and a very fine fiddle had he. Tweedledee, Tweedledee, went the fiddlers. There's none so rare as can compare with King Cole and his fiddlers 3.
Bravo!
Yay.
Bravo, Wade Taylor, ladies and gentlemen, doing a charming nursery rhyme written by Mother Goose. Well, I have to confess that Mother Goose is a fictional author.
Say it isn't so.
Well, there are people who claim to have been Mother Goose, and they might have been entitled to in their own mind, in their own way. There was a woman in Boston who, there's a gravesite and everything, and she was known for singing, ditties to kids, and people really do feel she was the Mother Goose, when in fact there's someone that truly predates her,
Right.
someone who is fictional who truly predates her.
Right.
Mother Goose was, originally there was a collection of French fairy tales from Charles Perrault, and later there were the English nursery rhymes,
Right.
and I believe in Mother Goose, don't you all?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, she is pictured as a goose when you see her in books. But at first she was pictured as a woman for a while. But I like the look of the goose as the iconic goose, and the giver of these wonderful, wonderful nursery rhymes. And we'll talk more on another show about some of the people who felt they were Mother Goose. But I just don't want to remove the mystery from younger listeners today. And I just want to assure you that there really was a Mother Goose. And I'm going to read yet another story now. And this, again, comes from Frank Baum's version of Mother Goose stories, Mother Goose in Prose, where he delightfully explains some of the unexplainable rhymes in the nursery tales. And on a later show, I also want to talk about some of the political and social commentary that's in the rhymes. Apparently, these rhymes were very much like a Saturday Night Live sketch where there was a lot of political commentary going on in there. But we'll talk about that another time. Tonight is just fantasy and stories and a lovely time. And I love Frank Baum's version of these rhymes. So here's Frank Baum's take on Mother Goose's The Man in the Moon. And it starts with part of the real Mother Goose rhyme. The man in the moon came tumbling down and inquired the way to Norwich. He went by the south and burned his mouth with eating cold peas porridge. What? Have you never heard the story of the man in the moon? Then I must surely tell it, for it is very amusing, and there is not a word of truth in it. The man in the moon was rather lonesome, and he often peeked over the edge of the moon and looked down upon the earth and envied all the people who lived together, for he thought it must be vastly more pleasant to have companions to talk to than to be shut up in a big planet all by himself, where he had to whistle to keep himself company. One day he looked down and saw an alderman sailing up through the air towards him. This alderman was being translated instead of being transported. And as he came near, the man in the moon called to him and said, "How is everything down on the earth?" "Everything is lovely," replied the alderman, "and I wouldn't leave it if I was not obliged to." Well, what's a good place to visit down there?" inquired the man in the moon. "Oh, Norwich is a mighty fine place," returned the alderman, "and it's famous for its peas porridge." And then he sailed out of sight and left the man in the moon to reflect upon what he had said. The words of the alderman made him more anxious than ever to visit the earth, and so he walked thoughtfully home and put a few lumps of ice in the stove to keep him warm, and sat down to think how he should manage the trip. You see, everything went by contraries in the moon, and when the man wished to keep warm, he knocked off a few chunks of ice and put them in his stove. and he cooled his drinking water by throwing red-hot coals of fire into the pitcher. Likewise, when he became chilly, he took off his hat and coat, and even his shoes, and so became warm. And in the hot days of summer, he put on his overcoat to cool off. All of which seems very queer to you, no doubt, but it wasn't at all queer to the man in the moon, for he was accustomed to it. Well, he sat by his ice-cool fire and thought about his journey to the earth, and finally he decided the only way he could get there was to slide down a moonbeam. So he left the house and locked the door and put the key in his pocket, for he was uncertain how long he should be gone, and then he went to the edge of the moon and began to search for a good, strong moonbeam. At last he found one that seemed rather substantial and reached right down to a pleasant-looking spot on the earth. So he swung himself over the edge of the moon and put both arms tight around the moonbeam and started to slide down. But he found it rather slippery, and in spite of all his efforts to hold on, he found himself going faster and faster, so that just before he reached the earth, he lost his hold and came tumbling down head over heels and fell plump into a river. The cool water nearly scalded him before he could swim out, but fortunately he was near the bank, and he quickly scrambled upon the land and sat down to catch his breath. By the time it was morning, and as the sun rose, its hot rays cooled him off somewhat, so that he began looking about curiously at all the strange sights and wondering where on earth he was. By and by, a farmer came along the road by the river with a team of horses drawing a load of hay, and the horses looked so odd to the man in the moon that at first he was greatly frightened. Never before, having seen horses except from his home in the moon, from whence they looked a good deal smaller. But he plucked up courage and said to the farmer, "Can you tell me the way to Norwich, sir?" "Norwich?" repeated the farmer musingly. "I don't know exactly where it be, sir, but it's somewhere away to the south." "Thank you," said the man in the moon. But stop! I must not call him the man in the moon any longer, for of course he was now out of the moon. So I'll simply call him the man, and you know that which man I mean. Well, the man in the... the man... I nearly forgot what I just said. The man turned around to the south and began walking briskly along the road, for he had made up his mind to do as the alderman had advised and travel to Norwich, that he might eat some of the famous pease porridge that was made there. And finally, after a long and tiresome journey, he reached the town and stopped at one of the first houses he came to, for by this time he was very hungry indeed. A good-looking woman answered his knock at the door, and he asked politely, "Is this the town of Norwich, madam?" "Surely this is the town of Norwich," returned the woman. "I came here to see if I could get some pease porridge," continued the man, "for I hear you make the nicest porridge in the world in this town." "That we do, sir," answered the woman, "and if you'll step inside, I'll give you a bowl, for I have plenty in the house that is newly made." So he thanked her and entered the house, and she asked, "Will you have it hot or cold, sir?" "Oh, cold by all means," replied the man, "for I detest anything hot to eat." She soon brought him a bowl of cold pease porridge, and the man was so hungry that he took a big spoonful at once. But no sooner had he put it in his mouth than he uttered a great yell and began dancing frantically about the room, for of course the porridge that was cold to the earth folk was hot to him, and the big spoonful of cold pease porridge had burned his mouth to a blister. "What's the matter?" asked the woman. "Matter!" screamed the man. "Why, your porridge is so hot it has burned me." "Fiddlesticks!" she replied. "The porridge is quite cold." "Try it for yourself," he cried. So she tried it and found it very cold and pleasant. But the man was so astonished to see her eat the porridge that had blistered his own mouth that he became frightened and ran out of the house and down the street as fast as he could go. The policeman on the first corner saw him running and promptly arrested him, and he was marched off to the magistrate for trial. "What is your name?" asked the magistrate. "I haven't any," replied the man, for of course, as he was the only man in the moon, it wasn't necessary he should have a name. Come, no nonsense, said the magistrate. You must have a name. Who are you? Why, I'm the man in the moon. That's rubbish, said the magistrate, eyeing the prisoner severely. You may be a man, but you're not in the moon. You're in Norwich. Well, that is true, answered the man, who was quite bewildered by this idea. And of course you must be called something, continued the magistrate. Well then, said the prisoner, if I'm not the man in the moon, I must be the man out of the moon, so call me that. Very good, replied the judge. Now then, where did you come from? The moon. Oh, you did, eh? How'd you get here? I slid down a moonbeam. Indeed. Well, what were you running for? A woman gave me some cold peas porridge, and it burned my mouth. The magistrate looked at him a moment in surprise, and then he said, This person is evidently crazy, so take him to the lunatic asylum and keep him there. This would surely have been the fate of the man had there not been present an old astronomer who had often looked at the moon through his telescope, and so had discovered that what was hot on earth was cold in the moon, and what was cold here was hot there, so he began to think the man had told the truth. Therefore he begged the magistrate to wait a few minutes while he looked through his telescope to see if the man in the moon was there. So as it was now night, he fetched his telescope and looked at the moon and found there was no man in it at all. It seems to be true, said the astronomer, that the man has got out of the moon somehow or other. Let me look at your mouth, sir, and see if it is really burned. Then the man opened his mouth, and everyone saw plainly it was burned to a blister. Thereupon the magistrate begged his pardon for doubting his word and asked him what he would like to do next. Oh, I would like to get back to the moon, said the man, for I don't like this earth of yours at all. The nights are too hot. Why, it's cool this evening, said the magistrate. I'll tell you what we can do, remarked the astronomer. There's a big balloon in town, which belongs to the circus that came here last summer, and was pawned for a board bill. We can inflate this balloon and send the man out of the moon home in it. Well, that's a good idea, replied the judge. So the balloon was brought and inflated, and the man got into the basket and gave the word to let go, and then the balloon mounted up into the sky in the direction of the moon. The good people of Norwich stood on the earth and tipped back their heads and watched the balloon go higher and higher until finally the man reached out and caught hold of the edge of the moon, and behold, the next minute he was the man in the moon again. After this adventure, he was well contented to stay at home, and I've no doubt, if you look through a telescope, you will see him there to this day. Well, that was a delightful explanation from Mr. Frank Baum, and a delightful explication, perhaps, of the man in the moon, the wonderful Mother Goose rhyme, the man in the moon. As I recall, that Mother Goose parade, haven't you actually worked it before?
No, I got to be an MC for the inaugural Boo Parade.
Oh, well, I predict one day soon. Yes, it will. This is just a premonition that you will be an MC of the Mother Goose Parade as well. The Mother Goose Parade, far, far more dignified position for you, I should think.
I learned very quickly to appreciate how that DJs and professional MCs, all that chatter that they do.
Yes.
It's necessary.
Yes.
There was a lot of dead air at my end of the parade.
Well, that's okay. Well, when you get, when I misconstrue things, they become true later. I'll make that rhyme better later too, by the way. So I think we should go to the Mother Goose Parade this year. We really
I love
should.
the Mother Goose Parade. I remember going as a little kid, and then my mother for many years lived in East County, and so the Mother Goose Parade was basically down the street. So we took my brother and sister every year when they were little.
Yeah, Christina Continelli, who has often been on our show and has written some radio dramas for us. She has very strong memories of the Mother Goose Parade too, and it was her grandparents who would take her, so that her parents could have a little time to themselves.
Nice.
And she does remember making that pilgrimage, and being with her grandparents and being at the parade. Miss Melanie, is there another Mother Goose rhyme that you could share with us?
Sure. I was thumbing through this book of Mother Goose nursery rhymes, and I came across one that I've heard before, but I'm not too familiar with. I couldn't recite it from memory, but I thought it was very sweet.
I'd love to hear it.
It's golden slumbers kiss your eyes, smiles awake you when you rise. Sleep, pretty darling, do not cry, and I will sing you a lullaby. Rock them, lullaby. Care is heavy, therefore sleep you. You are care, and care must keep you. Sleep, pretty darling, do not cry, and I will sing you a lullaby. Rock them, lullaby. And I think that line, and I will sing a lullaby, that's in a Beatles song. So, there's so much of the nursery rhymes.
It's so part of our culture, going, and again, starting with the French and then going into English. And the English had a Mother Hubbard, so of course they would want to have a Mother Goose at one point too.
Right.
We'll do some more research for our show to talk about more about Mother Hubbard. But in the meantime, let's just embrace the fantasy and get ready for that parade.
Absolutely. Do you have a favorite? Did you grow up with Mother Goose?
I know the rhymes, and I'm sure we had a Mother Goose book at home, and I'm sure that it was read to me at night, but I'm really good at falling asleep. So I think I fall asleep, during the first stanza, and I'd be gone. But I remember looking at the pictures. I couldn't read yet, but I remember looking at the pictures and loving that book. I'm not sure which edition I had. There is an edition where there's some Maxfield Parrish illustrations, quite spectacular, and there are editions with some of the original black and white illustrations. So many famous ones.
Well, I was going to say you fell asleep so well, but I remember using the nursery rhymes to help me learn how to read. And that my mom, bless her, she used to let me read them to her out loud. And so I would try and challenge myself by how quickly could I read them.
Oh my!
That type of thing. And for a few years, I was UC San Diego has a program for graduate students who want to learn conversational English.
Yes.
And so I was a tutor.
These are non-native English speakers.
Non-native English speakers who want to learn conversational English. And I tutored for about 3 years. And one of the tools that I would use to help them learn to help with their English was nursery rhymes.
Yes.
Because you have to do, the sounds that sound alike, the that and the cat, and it does help with pronunciation because they're very short, sharp words.
Yes.
For the most part.
And they are poetry, so
the
articulatory phonetics make sense.
Exactly.
And it really exercises what the phonemes are of your language.
Right.
Wade, you've got this book before you again, don't you?
Well, and to tie that in, here's a perfect example. Teaching counting, right? And getting people used to the numbers and the sounds of the numbers. And this is, again, so baked into our culture that we don't even recognize it or appreciate it sometimes. But 1, 2, buckle my shoe. 3, 4, open the door. 5, 6, pick up sticks. 7, 8, lay them straight. 9, 10, a big fat hen. And it continues on to 20, but, just these things stick in our brains, but they're in many ways designed specifically for that.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's what...
Mnemonic? What's the word?
Yeah. Oh,
Mnemonics?
Yes.
Mnemonics, thank you.
But
I had to think about that.
But that's what, truly effectively written poetry, it's easy to memorize because it's so structured. You can actually draw a chart with the phonetics, with the articulatory phonetics, and it'll look like a perfectly woven carpet with a design, because whether it's a bilabial, plosive, voiced or unvoiced, or a fricative, all those they all line up, and you can actually make a chart, and it'll look like a beautiful mountain range that makes too much sense. Because it's just so structured.
Well, like you were saying earlier, how a lot of how my mom used to sing a song of sixpence to me. Like a lot of them don't have music, but they're
very musical.
And I don't know, they're so comforting to me. And I think you just explained it scientifically, but that they're so structured, and they have this pattern that's a perfect pattern. And you might not know that logically, but when you listen to it or when you say it, it just feels like comfort to me.
Yes, because you know where it's going, and
yeah. And they feel so much fun in your mouth.
yeah, it's great. Because it's being exercised appropriately.
Right.
For what the language is. Yeah.
And I love the organicness of it, and perhaps this is a good thing for teachers to notice, right, and educators, that this is how people learn, right? You go back to Napoleon's time, they had to create a French nation, right? It was mostly provinces. And they had to logically think out, how do we create a school curriculum to make people feel like they're part of a nation, right? But these are examples of how our cultures did it intuitively. This is how we trained our young people about what our culture was like, the important memes in our culture. And, this is centuries of them figuring out the best way to do this. And it just comes out as a sweet poem, at the end of the process that, again, was probably very organic. How do we tell our kids these things they need to know about our culture? And again, being ingrained, here's something a little Shakespearean, let's say.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen,
yes.
Wade Taylor of WSRadio.com, our special guest here on Ether Tail Radio Theater, is about to read yet another Mother Goose rhyme. Wade Taylor, ladies and gentlemen.
For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the battle was lost. For want of a battle, the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a horseshoe nail.
The
My
infrastructure is important.
A horse, my kingdom for a horse.
Exactly. So look how, it's got Shakespearean connotations. It's a general philosophical thing that even applies to today, like Scott, you're saying about infrastructure. These, are a treasure trove to be harvested if you kind of look at them deeply. And let's plug this Frank Baum book again that kind of goes into the story behind the rhymes.
Yeah, Frank Baum wrote a book called Mother Goose in Prose, and it's his take on the Mother Goose rhymes, filling in some blanks, and it's very, very, very clever.
Yeah,
it's not necessarily the real story,
No.
because we have been told that the real story is that there are some political comments in there that don't resonate with us because we're not aware of the politics of that time. We'll do a little bit more research. But I love this Frank Baum book. Yes, besides The Wizard of Oz, he wrote Mother Goose in Prose, which is his take on the Mother Goose stories, filling in some blanks and making it quite fun and clever.
Yeah, there's a lot of backstory that we may not be aware of. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady. And I bet there is some kind of political backdrop to that.
Yes, and it has fallen down several times.
Yeah, but then others are so simple, and I know I have used this myself to remember these things. I'm sure many people have. 30 days hath September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31, excepting February alone. And that has 28 days clear, and 29 in each leap year.
Yes, I know that. I know people who use that frequently.
Yes. And depending on what Mother Goose edition you're reading, there will be some more modern surprises in it too.
Exactly.
But depending on what edition you're reading, there are going to be so many wonderful surprises, and it's worth visiting as a topic. And thank you for the invitation, Wade. So
Yes.
We're so grateful for the opportunity to celebrate the Mother Goose Parade and tell some Mother Goose rhymes and stories.
Yeah, and kudos to the fine sponsors that are sponsoring the parade. And we do have a great community with great resources. And let me take a moment to draw attention to the Geisel Library. And Scott, tell us a little bit about some of the activities that you do. You know, Mother Goose is really pointed towards our youngest. So I'm sure you guys do things to support elementary, preschool, perhaps?
Yeah, at the UC San Diego Library, I have a lot of programs that are meant for families, and they do come to the Seuss Room in Geisel Library to attend. Sometimes they're more musical in nature, like our annual Toy Piano Festival, and sometimes they're more theatrical in nature, like the annual Paper Theater Festival that we do, those small-scale theaters made of paper with paper dolls. And that was a Victorian-era toy that we're wanting to have a comeback. Yes, and even some of the things that are more geared towards the students there, the children seem to be welcome and enjoy it. Like, we do a program called Short Tales from the Mothership, where people send in microfiction, stories that are less than 250 words. And because that building is so spaceship-like, it is always sci-fi. And Melanie's given me slipped me a note in class and told me I should remind her that we have that annual turkey calling show, which we have specifically for children. You know, when we went to school, we did not get the entire week of Thanksgiving off. We only got Thursday, Friday off.
We got Thursday and Friday.
Well, because I just noticed all these kids in the library. I thought, oh, man, they're off the whole week. And so on the day before Thanksgiving, which is a Wednesday, as you know, we always host our annual turkey calling show. And that's when kids come into the Seuss Room and we have them tell some turkey riddles and we sing some songs.
Turkey
and we
puns.
make some, and we do some turkey calls. We learn how to use some of these turkey call devices. Now, by the way, the next event is on Halloween. It's the bicentennial of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And there probably still will be some younger, school kids there, like 4th graders, 5th graders, 6th graders, reading pieces less than 250 words about the Frankenstein novel or just the Frankenstein phenomena. And it's great to always do these family-friendly shows. The Frankenstein one, that's probably going to be more the older kids, I suppose.
Probably.
But such a great opportunity sometimes to work with these younger kids. And certainly at Thanksgiving. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Yes, and so we're expanding the conversation again. We do want to draw attention to the Mother Goose Parade, but really we also want to remind people the importance of education, the importance of literature, the importance of reading. There is something, even in this age of computers, we're finding there is something about holding a book.
Yeah, it is, because when you're reading from a book, just from sort of a neurolinguistic programming standpoint, you are truly in a state of meditation. Even in your posture, it's almost like prayer when you're reading a book. Whereas when you're looking at a computer screen, you're just, a hostage in a stagecoach, and, everything's passing by so quickly in front of your eyes, and you're not really in a meditative state. So there is something about truly reading a book that's so much different than being in front of a glowing screen.
And it's critical that parents help lead their children to this. So we encourage you, go to your local bookstore. What the heck? For this one thing, go find out your local bookstore and go get the Mother Goose book and read it to your kids and talk to them about what it means. Use it as a point of engagement, a point of discussion. And then as you're maybe wanting to draw this into the older kids, go get the Frank Baum book and understand a little bit more what's behind the poems. And again, it's just a great, simple way for us to engage our children, get them involved in reading, participate in your reading community, go by the UCSD Geisel Library, and appreciate all there is in San Diego that's supporting literature. And then you can also go to the Mother Goose Parade and just enjoy the community.
Yes, I agree.
So to close out, Scott, why don't you give us another reading, and I'll cue up the outro.
Okay. Well, I'll try to pick one that's less than 10 pages because, we got 15 minutes here. Let's see. What was the one that you were going to read for me? Did you want to read it or do you want me to?
Sure, I'll read it.
There was one that I asked you to read.
Yes, it was the one on Tom the Piper's son.
Yes, I always like stories about musicians. Yeah.
Fair enough. Tom the Piper's son. Tom the Piper's son stole a pig and away he run. The pig was eat and Tom was beat and Tom ran crying down the street. There was not a worse vagabond in Shrewsbury than old Barney the Piper. He never did any work except to play the pipes, and he played so badly that few pennies were ever found their way into his pouch. It was whispered around that old Barney was not very honest, but he was so sly and cautious that no one had ever caught him in the act of stealing, although a good many things had been missed after they had fallen to the old man's way. Barney had one son, named Tom, and they lived all alone in a little hut away at the end of the village street, for Tom's mother had died when he was a baby. You may not suppose that Tom was a very good boy, since he had such a queer father, but neither was he very bad, and the worst fault he had was in obeying his father's wishes when Barney wanted him to steal a chicken for their supper or a pot of potatoes for their breakfast. Tom did not like to steal, but he had no one to teach him to be honest, and so, under his father's guidance, he fell into bad ways. One morning, Tom the Piper's son was hungry when the day begun. He wanted a bun and asked for one, but soon found out that there were none. "What shall we do?" he asked his father. "Go hungry," replied Barney. "Unless you want to take my pipes and play in the village, perhaps they will give you a penny." "No," answered Tom, shaking his head. "No one will give me a penny for playing, but Farmer Bowser might give me a penny to stop playing if I went to his house. He did last week, you know." "You'd better try it," said his father. "It's mighty uncomfortable to be hungry." So Tom took his father's pipes and walked over the hill to Farmer Bowser's house, for you must know that Tom the Piper's son learned to play when he was young, but the only tune that he could play was "Over the Hills and Far Away." And he played this one tune as badly as his father himself played, so that the people were annoyed when they heard him and often begged him to stop. When he came to Farmer Bowser's house, Tom started up the pipes and began to play with all his might. The farmer was in his woodshed, sawing wood, so he did not hear the pipes, and the farmer's wife was deaf and could not hear him. But a little pig that had strayed around in front of the house heard the noise and ran away in great fear to the pigsty. Then, as Tom saw the playing did no good, he thought he would sing also, and therefore he began bawling at the top of his voice, "Over the hills, not a great ways off, the woodchuck died with a whooping cough." The farmer had stopped sawing to rest just then, and when he heard the singing, he rushed out of the shed and chased Tom away with a big stick of wood. The boy went back to his father and said sorrowfully, for he was more hungry than before, "The farmer gave me nothing but a scolding, but there was a very nice pig running around the yard." "How big was it?" asked Barney. "Oh, just about big enough to make a nice dinner for you and me." The piper slowly shook his head. "'Tis long since I on pig have fed, and though I feel it's wrong to steal, roast pig is very nice," he said. Tom knew very well what he meant by that, so he laid down the pipes and went back to the farmer's house. When he came near, he heard the farmer again sawing wood in the woodshed, and so he went softly up to the pigsty and reached over and grabbed the little pig by the ears. The pig squealed, of course, but the farmer was making so much noise himself that he did not hear it, and in a minute Tom had the pig tucked under his arm and was running back home with it. The piper was very glad to see the pig and said to Tom, "You are a good son, and the pig is very nice and fat. We shall have a dinner fit for a king." It was not long before the piper had the pig killed and cut into pieces and boiling in the pot. Only the tail was left out, for Tom wanted to make a whistle of it, and as there was plenty to eat besides the tail, his father let him have it. The piper and his son had a fine dinner that day, and so great was their hunger that the little pig was all eaten up at one meal. Then Barney lay down to sleep, and Tom sat on a bench outside the door and began to make a whistle out of the pig's tail with his pocket knife. Now Farmer Bowser, when he had finished sawing the wood, found it was time to feed the pig, so he took a pail of meal and went to the pigsty. But when he came to the sty, there was no pig to be seen, and he searched all around the place for a good hour without finding it. "Piggy, piggy, piggy," he called, but no piggy came, and then he knew his pig had been stolen. He was very angry indeed, for the pig was a great pet, and he had wanted to keep him till it grew very big. So he put on his coat and buckled a strap round his waist and went down to the village to see if he could find out who had stolen his pig. Up and down the street he went, and in and out the lanes, but no traces of the pig could he find anywhere. And that was no great wonder, for the pig was eaten by that time, and its bones picked clean. Finally, the farmer came to the end of the street where the piper lived in his little hut, and there he saw Tom, sitting on a bench and blowing on a whistle made from a pig's tail. "Where'd you get that tail?" asked the farmer. "I found it," said naughty Tom, beginning to be frightened. "Let me see it," demanded the farmer. And when he had looked at it carefully, he cried out, "This tail belonged to my little pig, for I know very well the curl at the end of it. Tell me, you rascal, where's the pig?" Then Tom fell in a tremble, for he knew his wickedness was discovered. "The pig is eat, your honor," he answered. The farmer said never a word, but his face grew black with anger, and, unbuckling the strap that was about his waist, he waved it around his head and said, Whack came the strap over Tom's back. "Ow, ow," cried the boy, and started to run down the street. Whack, whack fell the strap over his shoulders, for the farmer followed at his heels halfway down the street. Nor did he spare the strap until he had given Tom a good beating. And Tom was so scared that he never stopped running until he came to the end of the village, and he bawled lustily the whole way and cried out at every step as if the farmer was still at his back. It was dark before he came back to his home, and his father was still asleep. So Tom crept into the hut and went to bed. But he had received a good lesson, and never after that could the old piper induce him to steal. When Tom showed by his actions his intention of being honest, he soon got a job of work to do, and before long he was able to earn a living more easily and a great deal more honestly than when he stole the pig to get a dinner and suffered a severe beating as a punishment. Tom, Tom the piper's son, now with stealing pigs was done. He'd worked all day instead of play and dined on tart and currant bun.
Well, that sounds delicious. Thank you, Miss Melanie. Well, I'll see you at the Mother Goose Parade, Miss Melanie. I'll bring some hot chocolates, then we'll keep, because it might be cool.
Yes,
that
yes.
day.
I'll practice my parade wave.
Excellent. And, and accidents happen all the time. You might end up being the MC, too.
Stop it.
It could happen.
Stop manifesting that
be
for me.
So be prepared. I'm not wishing for an accident. I'm just looking, and you should always be prepared. Well, good night, everybody. And thanks also to Wade Taylor for guesting tonight.
Good night.
Attention coaches, authors, speakers, and business owners. Please pay close attention to what I'm about to say if you want to secure massive visibility fast and generate thousands of highly qualified leads without spending a dime on advertising or marketing. The easiest way to make this happen is to appear as a guest on the world's most popular podcast. We recently came across an awesome resource that provides detailed contact information for 240 new media influencers who are looking for guests just like you. It's called the Ultimate Directory, and for a limited time you can get the preview edition of the directory absolutely free. That's right, for free. It's time for you to get the visibility you and your business deserve and connect with the world's leading icons of influence who can make you famous with the push of a button. Get your free preview edition of the Ultimate Directory right now at www.myultimatedirectory.com. That's myultimatedirectory.com.
You were born to do one amazing thing, but most people spend a lifetime trying to identify what it is. If you're in a job you don't like or are unemployed, if you're in a state of transition or just can't shake that nagging feeling that you were meant and made to do something extraordinary, then the Reinvention Workshop is exactly what you need. Led by award-winning self-help author Steve Olsher, the Reinvention Workshop will forever change your life. The Reinvention Workshop takes you step by step through Steve's proven formula that has helped so many people get on the right path and clear about what they were born to do. Take the first step to realizing the life you deserve and desire by visiting thereinventionworkshop.com today. No more delays. No more denial. Reconnect with your true self. Learn to live with purpose and conviction and become who you were born to be. The world is waiting for you. What are you waiting for? Log on to thereinventionworkshop.com today. That's thereinventionworkshop.com.
Too much to do? Not enough time to get it done? Call on the experts at Another 8 Hours for your business support needs. By partnering with Another 8 Hours, we allow you to focus on the more important matters, like being in front of your clients, doing what you do best, rather than being stuck at a desk poring over paperwork, rummaging through emails, returning phone calls, and struggling to get everything done by yourself. Meanwhile, your family and social life are going down the drain. Go to another8hours.com or call 8 more hours. That's 866-734-6877.
Education, industry experts, back to the basics. Is your company using the Internet of Things to its fullest potential? Enlist the Peggy Smedley Institute and its team of experts to create a customized plan for how to apply the IoT to your specific needs. Learn everything you need to know to achieve tangible business outcomes in today's digital economy. Contact us at 630-933-0844. That's 630-933-0844 or visit learnitiot.com.